Hi, Tom. Welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Simon. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for making the time. It's funny, Tom. I've had a lot of guests on this show, and everybody's got a different story. I mean, there's themes here, but geez, every story is different. And one of the things I loved about your story, and I know we're going to get on to Body3 Personal Fitness was the business you ultimately sold, but what I loved about your story was you actually bought the business originally. And then you took it through a growth journey and then you sold. So you really kind of ticked all the big boxes here for the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast. So no doubt there'll be a lot to unpack. But mate, could you maybe kick off for us? Maybe give us a little bit of your background and what led you to ultimately acquiring that first business.
Yeah, great question. I call myself a serial entrepreneur. Not that I love like going through the challenges and all that of being an entrepreneur. I'm just allergic to working for somebody else, and I make a crap employee, so nobody would hire me anyway. So might as well like start my own business. But really, my journey started when I was 16 years old as an entrepreneur, and I had a mobile DJ and string quartet business when I
Wow.
was in high school. And so that kind of took me through college. Ultimately, I got a degree in theater management of all the random degrees that you can get, and quickly found that I couldn't support my two worst habits, living inside and eating with a theater degree. So I started working in oil and gas. I was living in Chicago, Illinois, and I started working for Amoco Chemicals that was bought out by BP. Um, I got sick and tired of the cold, so I moved down to Houston, Texas, and I continued to be working in oil and gas. And what happened is, in that 12 years of, about 12 years of working in corporate jail, I call it, I got fat. I gained 40 pounds. My blood pressure went through the roof. My cholesterol was really high. I was 30 years old. And when I saw my doctor, he was like, well, you need to make a choice. Like, you can either take these pills to correct the problem. That's what I recommend you do. Or you could do this thing called diet and exercise, but nobody does that. Just take the pills. So luckily, he doesn't practice medicine anymore. So, but I love a challenge, right? An entrepreneur. So I decided to do the diet and exercise thing, and I did a 12-week body transformation program back in 2001. And in 12 weeks, I lost 40 pounds of fat and gained 10 pounds of muscle. But more importantly, that cholesterol came back down, my blood pressure came down. And when I went back to see my doctor, he was like, I'm sorry, who are you? He could have hardly recognized it. He was like, wait, you have a six pack now, and it used to be a keg. So
Wow.
it was in that transformation that, people at work were saying, gosh, Tom, what's your secret? What are you taking? I was
Yeah.
like,
Quick
yeah.
question on that, Tom, because and congratulations, by the way. I mean, that kind of transformation, it's I've yo-yoed with my weight over the years, and so I know just how damn good it feels when you make that kind of sort of progress. But I'm curious in your thoughts about what led to you kind of getting overweight or being unhealthy or less healthy. Um, do you think eating is some sort of perhaps mechanism or linked with happiness or a lack of it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'll give you my diet before that led up to the 40 pounds. So, I was working
Yeah.
for a corporate, and we used to work downtown Chicago, big building, Amoco building, but they eventually moved us out to the suburbs. I live downtown, and so I had to get a car and now drive and commute an hour on a good day when it wasn't snowing to the office and back. So 2 hours a day. So
Wow.
I would get in my car at 5:30 in the morning, and I would roll up to Dunkin' Donuts. They would see my car coming, and they would have my blueberry donut, my chocolate glazed donut, and my medium coffee ready for me. And I had my $2.01 ready for them
Oh, wow.
every single day in the
Yeah.
morning. So that,
I, I'm actually still just reeling that only actually cost $2. So
yeah,
What? Yeah. No, but okay. Yeah, I hear you. But
That
clearly
was
they
before
hear you
the
when you well, right?
yeah, and that was before the big recession of 2008. So it's probably $10 now. So that was breakfast. Lunch would be generally there on campus because you can really go anywhere. And then on the way home for my hour commute, I would stop off at Wendy's and get a fried chicken sandwich. And of course, when they ask you, do you want a biggie fries, biggie soda? Of course, why not? It's only 10 cents more or whatever it was then.
Yeah, yeah.
And literally, I would wolf that sandwich down before I got to the toll plaza, which was about 5 minutes, drive. And then I would get home. I'd be super tired, go figure. And I'd watch TV and have a bowl of ice cream before bed.
Yep. Yep.
So no wonder my blood pressure was through the roof and my cholesterol. I mean, it was just such a terrible diet. And, to your point, was the food masking something? Yeah. I mean, I was in the car for 2 hours. I was definitely not happy. A lot of health concerns with that job. And, ultimately that's why I made that change.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. Obviously, it's a personal journey for you, and it is interesting. I without wanting to jump ahead in your story, but I just see the similarities around talking to business owners and asking them what they want out of their business journey, and invariably money and stuff comes up like that, and certainly one of the questions I'd like to extract from you at the end of this podcast too is your definition of success. I just find it's funny when people start thinking about their end game, often too late to do anything about it, but when they start thinking about their end game and start defining what is actually important. Like I just find time and time again, money is important, but only to a point. Like some people are so much happy to take less money, but just have the right living conditions, just to be able to live the way they want to live is worth far more than extra millions or whatever it might be. And so, back to the original point here, right, is happiness. What does happiness mean to you? How do you want to live your life? How do you, those critical things that I think every entrepreneur really should be thinking about, and preferably not at the last minute.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why entrepreneurs get into business and do business themselves, but often to have that time freedom. And to me, that is the critical piece, to be able to choose what I get to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
However, what I've seen with other entrepreneurs is you're trading a 40-hour work week for a boss that you don't like for an 80-hour work week with a boss that you really don't like yourself.
Yes, I have.
Usually, right?
Yeah, exactly. I often laugh. I hear people say, "Geez, if I only could clone myself," entrepreneurs. If only I could clone myself, and I keep saying, yeah, if I could clone myself, I'd probably get really, really irritated with my coworkers because they just annoy me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, man, I get it.
Yeah.
So where were you on this journey, right? Yeah. So it sounds to me like, without wanting to put words in your mouth, but you've got this career, clearly something from a work environment and lack of control over your own world and, future is a factor. It's feeding into your health.
Yep.
At what point, where in this journey do you start thinking, I need to do something different?
Yeah. I mean, even, all along when I was, from 16 all the way through working in corporate, I always had those side hustles. I always did something else that kept that entrepreneurial spirit alive in me. But I always had that safety net. So I was not taking the risks necessary to really propel that business forward when I was doing the kind of side hustles. And I see that over and over and over again. So once I went through my body transformation, people were asking, what are you doing? And I was like, you know what? I could probably make some money teaching people what I did. And so I got certified as a personal trainer, and I started, personal training as a side gig in the morning, at lunch, after work.
Yes.
And 5 a.m. to 9 p.m, I was away. And it was brutal. But I got to tell you, the times that I was on the floor working with clients, I was in heaven.
Yeah.
And then I go to work and I was going somewhere else. for that 8 hours that I actually had to be behind the desk and dealing with, shipping propane across the United States of America. So it was unfulfilling. And it took me a full year of planning to exit, a very nice, cushy six-figure job. I was traveling quite a bit, all of the kind of the nice stuff that comes along with having, working for a large corporation. But what overshadowed that was my unhappiness working at a large corporation. And I remember, so it took me a year of planning, and I knew I wanted to exit. I saw a business. I went to, the broker sites and,
Yep.
biz buy sell or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. So let me stop you there quickly. So your instinct initially from the get go was buy a business, not go and start something and build it from scratch.
I think it was dual. I was looking at both
Yep.
options. Um, because I was personal training, I saw some really good potential in that. And when I started the company, incorporated, it was before I left the corporate world, but I was talking to my attorney and going through all the different options of, do you start it from scratch? I already had a client base. So I was like, well, it's not really starting from scratch, but do I get a premises? Do I get all the equipment, do all that? And, it was really up in the air, kind of like it was 50-50 toss up. It's going to cost about the same. Um, and it just so happened that a fitness studio came up that was for sale. And I was like, well, you know, this seems, somebody's talking to me. The universe is telling me that this is available. And it was interesting when I went with the broker to the business owner on a Sunday morning, and it's quite funny. And we just couldn't come to an agreement over, a month's time. He wanted way too much for what I would consider the business was worth. But yet, over the course of about 6 months, I get this phone call 6 months later and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling now. He had some health issues, and he's like, can we talk without the broker because he had ended that relationship? And sure, why
Yeah.
not? And eventually that price went from here down to there. And I was like, well, this is a no brainer. And I'd already been in that planning phases to save up, to have all the everything in my head straight for when I didn't have $9,000 a month coming into my bank account,
Yes.
from the company. So, I had all the savings. And I think that's some advice that I hear from a lot of, Insta gurus out there that say, oh, burn the bridges, don't look back, burn the ships and all that. And I think that's really irresponsible
Yeah.
because there needs to be some planning in place because not everything goes as planned.
Yeah. Well, in fact, it's probably the one thing we can guarantee is that nothing will go to plan. So,
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened to me. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, so he's called you up. You're having this new chat. Prices come down. You're in the ball game. From that conversation on, how long roughly? I know we're probably going back a few years now, but how long roughly do you think it took for you to strike a deal and get the contracts done and et cetera, et cetera? And now, hey, bingo, you're the new owner.
Yeah, it took about 6 months.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
and it was kind of funny, the progression on it. It became, hey, Tom, I'm probably going to be selling in the next 6 months or so, or a year. Why don't you come in and rent space from me as an independent contractor and train your clients here? I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. That'd be a really good transition. So I started renting from him. And then like a month later, he was like, yeah, maybe we move that time frame up a little bit. And then it became, can you do it tomorrow?
Excellent. Yes, we can at the right price, right?
Absolutely. And we came to an agreement. And then so I bought the business, and then about a week later, I gave notice. So I bought the business in January of 2008. the absolute worst time
Yeah,
to,
recession.
yeah,
Yeah,
the recession to buy a
yeah.
business. Well, um, and I gave my notice at work, and I reported to the executive vice president at that point, and I go into his office and I give my letter of resignation, and he's like, uh, "You're going to do what?" Yeah, I'm going to I'll open this gym. I'm going to be a personal trainer. And he goes, you'll never make the type of money that you'll make here.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was so telling in terms of his mindset versus my mindset. I was like, you know what? That's not that important.
Yeah.
I want time. I really should have said, I just don't want to work for you anymore. But,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're the reason I'm leaving.
you know, as a side note, karma really is a bitch sometimes, because
Yeah.
his about 2 years later, his wife started working out with me because it was in the area,
Oh
and
wow.
ultimately she left him. She got really fit, and they got divorced. And
Oh
I think I,
man.
I had a little bit to do with that. Well, not that way, but
No, yes, no, I know what you're saying. You helped her with her fitness goals, got healthy. She
yeah,
probably started seeing herself in a different life, and
absolutely, and definitely didn't need him in her life. And nobody needed that guy in their lives, actually.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's. I wonder if she became unhealthy or overweight because she was unhappy. It's yeah. It's one of those
probably.
things, and
Yeah.
I say all this as I say from personal experience. I think I've certainly used food as a crutch and stuff like that at times because it's sort of a hey, I deserve this. I've worked really hard.
Yeah.
And whether it's alcohol or food or it's easy to see things like that as a reward, whereas really, if you have a little bit of it, sure, but
Yeah, yeah,
how often do you do that?
not as a coping mechanism. Yeah,
Yeah, totally right,
yeah,
totally.
exactly.
So you bought the business. I
Yeah,
mean, what you've gone through there sounds like a very kind of organic process, as opposed to perhaps a lot of the companies I see out there, and even the sort of search funders and stuff like that, who are, very proactively and almost using a very professional process framework to go out and hunt and find businesses. So,
yeah.
um, do you think there are any sort of lessons, takeaways, benefits, from going down or just having gone through that more organic process as opposed to, some of the other methods?
Yeah. Well, I did go down that route in terms of the organic, but not to say that I wasn't investigating and had a framework that I was going through already.
Yeah,
And
cool.
what I really believe in that is, we have that RAS system, reticular activation system in our head, that when you are so focused on something and you have that outcome, which for me was to start this personal training business, opportunities are always among us. But when we are focused on a specific opportunity, now we're going to start to see that opportunity everywhere. And now we're open to receive those opportunities. And I really believe that that's what happened in this case, is that I just opened myself up to imagine and to see opportunities when they did present themselves. And
Yeah,
so
that's
when this presented itself, I was like, well, that totally makes sense. It ticked all the boxes that I needed, most
yeah.
of the boxes anyway.
That's a fascinating part of your story, and I think a really great takeaway for anybody listening to this that is thinking about acquiring, whether you're going into your next venture or you're thinking about buying a bolt-on for an existing operation, is that yes, you could be out there and just kind of doing the organic thing, but geez, you want to have a bit of a framework and a plan in the background,
Absolutely,
right? Because it
absolutely.
probably, if nothing else, helps you be organized, collate your thoughts, put your focus and attention on the things that you think are important.
Yeah, absolutely. And having a professional to help you through that process as well is so important. Like my attorney, who's also a really good friend of mine, was invaluable to
Yeah.
that process. In fact, at one point, I was thinking of bringing on a partner, and uh, so my attorney Jim, he was like, "So, what value is this partner bringing to the equation other than some money?" And I really had to think hard. I was like, you know what? Not much. because the other guy was like, hey, I'd love to go into business with you. It was actually a client. I'd love to go into business with you. I'll invest, $20,000-$30,000 in the business. And I was like, well, why do you want to invest in the business? And he's like, well, I want to get out of my job. I don't like my job, so I want to do something else. And when I explained that to Jim, he was like, yeah, that's like red flag number one. Like, because then we were like, what happens if there's not enough money to pay us? Like, what's going to happen then? And this guy was so focused on getting a paycheck that it just, so we ended that before it got to anything, right? And just in the investigation. So,
That's
partnerships
really
is,
well, and obviously having good advice around you to point things out like that, or at least give you a different perspective on it, is I think critical in any big life decision, right? Whether it's business or otherwise. But I just picking up on that whole exploring why you might want or why you might not want a business partner, and it's certainly something I've seen in my travels when business owners are saying to me, "Oh, I'm thinking about bringing on a partner, or I'm thinking about giving some shares to some key employees," or and don't get me wrong, like giving shares to employees can be very useful, but business owners need to recognize that that's actually just part of an incentive retention thing. Like it doesn't necessarily always drive the outcomes they think it will. Right. And so I've often asking business owners, you're thinking about having business partners. Why did you go into business in the first place? Oh, well, I wanted to be my own boss and I didn't want to answer to anybody. Right. And now you're thinking about giving somebody a little bit of control over your life.
Right. Yeah.
So it is a fascinating one.
Yeah. And not only that, but when you're giving shares or percentages, you really have to watch like how much of that percentage you're giving away for what the value is that you're receiving in the back end of it. Because I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but in the US, if you have shareholders that are greater than 20%, when you go get a loan, everybody's laundry is out for display. Then anybody that has like 20%, I believe, or greater share, they have to fulfill all the personal financials and all that. And if you have somebody that has some credit issues in the past, then that's going to impact your ability to get financing.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. In fact, we're doing some extra work on this. So anybody listening to this who's thinking about having shareholders, bringing in partners, how to manage existing shareholders, we actually did a webinar on this called Breaking Up with Your Business Partner. So, what happens at the very end of all this if things don't work out, right? So what are the things you do now to protect yourself if things don't work out? So, I mean, if anyone's listening to this and they want more information, they can go to buygrowsell.com/events and we'll put up some stuff around that. But it is interesting, it's just, I think I think this comes back to almost what we were saying in the beginning, is being really clear on what's important to you. And yes, money is important to a point. You need to make sure you're earning enough money to live at the very basic level the life you want. But then after that, what you said before about freedom and managing your own time and all those sort of things, I find become far more important once the base level of money is ticked off.
Yeah, absolutely. And and again, that time freedom, is relative when you're buying or starting a new business as well. Because a lot, like for me personally, I was working 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. And that was not the time freedom that I was looking for.
I was, those not watching the video, I was just putting my hand up going, I get it, man. Yep. I was saying to a friend once, we caught up and this was really early on in the first couple of years of our business. And I said, at the moment, I'm working 14 to 16-hour days. And literally, I turn off my computer, I go upstairs, I pass out, I wake up, I do it again. And he just looked at me like I was some kind of an alien with three heads and just went, what are you doing? You can't keep doing that. And the reality was he was right. You can't keep doing it. So, okay, you can burn it at both ends for a little while, but geez, if you don't have a plan to build yourself out of that, you may find yourself back into this scenario of having some health problems, right?
Yeah, exactly. And especially if you're in the health and fitness industry, you definitely don't want those health issues popping up. You're not a good example for your clients.
So how did you handle that? So you've bought the business, now you're running it, you've even got people wanting to buy into your business.
Yep.
What did that growth journey look like, and how did you handle some of those issues that business owners too often face?
Yeah. So when buying an existing business, a lot of times the existing owner will offer consulting services or offer a transition, all of that. And kind of from my own personal experience, I'd say don't take it because especially like if you're buying a business that was failing, why would you take advice from a business owner that was failing in their business, right? And that was definitely my case. So and so we reversed roles when I bought the business. He then rented from me, space and was still training clients, and it was just a disaster to say the
Wow.
least. Because then he still felt like he could establish some ideas and drop those ideas. I'm like, yeah, no, thanks for that. But
Yeah.
probably the biggest mistake that I made was I expanded too fast. And when I bought the business, I was able to take out my entire retirement account that had from oil and gas over 10 years of working there, which was a pretty sizable um, amount, and I invested that all into the business. And within 6 months, I was just about broke. And that was because while I was able to manage millions of dollars of freight for large corporations and negotiate and do all that good stuff, I didn't know the first thing about running a small business where you have to have every hat imaginable. You have to be the janitor, you have to be the salesperson, you have to be the practitioner. You're doing everything in the business. And not only was I just going crazy working 15 hours a day, but I was going broke as well. And the moment that I realized that I needed to, one, get help. And as entrepreneurs, we're on this island, our friends who are working corporate jobs don't understand like what we are going through. They don't have that mindset. And we feel like we're alone. We can't ask for help. And I just want to tell any entrepreneur that's going through that right now, that is absolute BS. There are people out that will help you. Many that will do it for free. Others that a coach or whatever that you can invest in. And that's what I did. I invested in a coach and learned how to sell. That was the number one skill that was completely lacking in my skill inventory. And once I mastered, and I really believe that I would say that I've mastered sales at this point. Once I mastered it, that first year in business, so I struggled to make $100,000 gross in that business in the first year. The second year, because I learned how to sell, I did 400,000
Yeah. Nice.
just from, and then new problems, came about. Now I needed staff
Yeah.
and do all that. And through coaching and education and, listening to podcasts and doing all that, business related things that I wasn't used to doing and kind of self-development work, I was able to learn and grow and build that business up over the next 10 years.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, and just to second your comments there, yeah. I mean, I guess if anyone's listening to this podcast, well, you're already doing something to help further yourself because you're listening to podcasts to try and learn, and so hopefully we'll give you some value around that investment of time as well. But there are so many business groups out there and peer groups and different things, and you don't have to necessarily spend a lot of money. I agree with you around the personal coaching stuff can be invaluable. I've got advisors and coaches and people who help me in every facet of my life because, well, as I always think, if it's good enough for Tiger Woods to have a coach and he's at the top of his game, like surely little old me with so much improvement to make deserves a coach as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but it's that's really cool. And so, Tom, where on this journey? So you've built it, you've grown it. I imagine somewhere in this journey, maybe it was year two, you started also going, hey, there's a sense of pride probably. You're starting to live probably a more comfortable life. Things are good. At what point in that journey do you start thinking about exiting and where did that first play into your mind?
Yeah. So my advice on that is always have the end in mind. So from the very beginning, and ultimately, while when I first purchased the business, I didn't say, okay, in 10 years, I'm going to exit the business. That was not that. But I knew that I wanted to grow it. And then ultimately, that would be my retirement when I
Yeah.
sold the business. So I always had the idea that I was going to sell the business.
Yes.
And when you're the practitioner of a business, and this is what I learned from buying the business before. He was the practitioner of the business. He was the only one there. You were buying him.
Yes.
And ultimately, I was like, well, I don't want to buy you and your intellectual property because there wasn't much there. I just want your equipment and I want your lease. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately that's what I bought because the price came down from, I have all this experience. I don't care about your experience. This is going to be my deal. And, that's kind of the value of the business is in the process that you've created to eliminate you as the person in the business. So, the old saying, work in the business versus on the business. You definitely want to be working on the business, not in the business. Because if that business is only tied to you, your name's on it, it's all your intellectual property, ultimately there's not going to be a lot of value to it to a new business owner because when you sell, you're not going to be there anymore.
So I'm curious how you handled the tension between working in and on the business, because clearly when you bought this business, it was you.
Yep.
You're the one, and so you mentioned before the first year was hard, then you learned to sell. So obviously you went away and learned on the about that's working on the business to me because it's working on you,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
So, but I find this in my own business, right? That there's this constant tension between doing more in the business because, oh geez, if I just do this, well, I might get a couple more clients, we might do this one other thing, versus going, no, I'm actually going to push out or say no to certain things and block that time. And okay, I might miss that sales opportunity, but I need those hours or those blocks of time to start doing something more valuable and working on the business. Like,
Absolutely.
how have you found that tension? And was there ever a shift where you started doing more on instead of in, or like, how did you find that process?
Yeah. And this is a problem that I see with a lot of practitioners that, doctors, personal trainers, physical therapists, that, that is your job is to be the practitioner. And a lot of dentists and all that as well. So it's hard to be the business owner and the practitioner at the same time. And that's why you see so many chiropractors and dentists and all that simply own dentist practices and hire people. But that shift from doing that did take a lot of time. I remember the first hire that I made was an administrative assistant.
Yep.
And I was like sweating bullets for weeks, like in talking to my coach, and I was like, I really can't afford $200 a week. It's $10 an hour. I was going to do part time, 20 hours a week. I can't afford $200 a week, and I'm like, I can't believe I'm saying that out loud now.
Oh, yeah.
But she was like, you can't afford not to. It's like, what's your time worth, Tom? And I was like, well, I charge out at that point it was $60 an hour. I said, well, it's worth $60 an hour. So, and then she was like, well, why are you doing $10 an hour work when you should be doing $60 an hour? And I was like, bingo. That was the switch.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, when I hired Breck, that was his name. He was ex-military, and after the first week of hiring him, um, I made like $4,000 worth of sales in that week. And not because he was around or there was some magic, but I now had the energy, I had the mental capacity to work on the business and not in the business. And I was able to do more marketing and ultimately make those more sales. And
Yeah.
that was when I was like, okay, I need to process everything out in this business so that I don't have to be here anymore because I didn't like to be there 15 hours a day.
Yeah. And it's a great point about working on the more valuable stuff, and even to the point of something we've talked about internally. I talked to my wife about our own work ethic. Is actually sometimes you're more productive if you actually stop, take a little bit of a break, you work less hours because you are fresher, more efficient, you're thinking clearer, you're more productive. So somewhere here, working more in the business, actually, there's the law of diminishing returns here. And at some point, you're actually working so damn much that you're actually just doing damage. You're
Yep.
really not adding value anymore. And um, I was curious that you mentioned the sort of assistant that you got. One of the questions I've heard a lot from business owners is, when do I know is the right time to hire an assistant? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when you lose your hair.
Says one bald man to another.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, all joking aside, like any time that you find that you're doing like repetitive work that isn't driving the business forward, but it's, for me, it was putting client folders together. It was scheduling clients. It was answering the phone for inquiries. I was like, this is, once I hired Breck and he took that off my plate, I was like, oh my gosh, now I have all this time on my hands. What am I going to do with myself?
Yep.
Get to live life.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I think weighing up what your time is worth and how important it is. I think too, if you've got a family, or for example, and you're sacrificing seeing certain things that your kids playing sport or doing they're in the musical or the whatever, and if you're missing some of those key things, and you're doing work that, quite frankly, is cheaper to pay somebody else to do, then geez, that's a pretty good sign that it's time.
Yeah.
I will just share one other example here, because I see this one a fair bit with professional service firms out there. Is that, when's a good time to hire another advisor slash consultant, whatever it might be, because they're not, $10 an hour or $5 an hour. They're now they might be a contractor and they might be a split of revenue on jobs won and things like that, but it's still a split. And one of the things I've found, certainly in the early days of our business, but I see all the time out there, is owner operators, advisors, building their business to a point where they're probably at about 100 or even up to 120% capacity. They're loaded, man.
Yeah.
And then they hire a new advisor consultant. They drop back down to probably about 80% capacity, because it's not a 50-50 split. You're sort of giving up a bit, but you're spending more time training them and whatever. But so that you can then both build back up to full capacity again. And it's an interesting journey. I think it's one that scares a lot of people, because they
Absolutely.
see their initial income drop. But geez, if you want to build something and you want to be you want to build something that not just that you're proud of, but can actually deliver on your life goals, then at some point you probably need to take a risk. Otherwise, you might as well take a job.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but if you are the only one in the business, it's going to be very difficult to sell, and to sell at a good price.
Yeah.
And so, like for me personally, when I had this ego that there's no other personal trainer in the entire world that can train my clients as good as I can.
Yep.
And yet the reality was, when I was training clients, I was thinking, is today payroll day? Did I pay that bill? What am I doing for the marketing on this campaign? Did I talk to that person? And so I'm not 100% with my client. And when I got to that point, I was like, you know what? Let me hire another trainer. And I made mistakes along the way. But once I found the right kind of hiring process and the right personality, that quite frankly, my clients were getting better results with them than they were with me. And so it was a great compliment. I think that, I built something that now I could hand the process off to somebody else that could then do that process.
Yeah.
And it saved me so much time.
Yeah, that's very cool. So where in this journey, you mentioned that you always kind of knew that you would ultimately sell the business, but was there a point on this journey, a year out, 2 years out, I don't know, but where on the journey were you that you realized, hey, maybe it's time, or maybe it's, if not sell tomorrow, but maybe I should be thinking about this and exploring it?
Yeah. Within 5 years of opening the business, at that point, I grew it to a point where I was super comfortable. I had staff that was doing things. The margins were great on the business as well. And I actually started doing consulting for the coaching company that I had hired from day one.
Yeah, right.
They actually approached me because of the success that I had with my business. They're like, "You're doing really great in this. Would you coach other business owners, fitness business owners?" I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun. I'm getting kind of bored right now,
Yeah,
because everything was just running. I really didn't have to do much anymore."
yeah,
And an entrepreneur that's bored is not a good entrepreneur.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah. So I started working with them, and then kind of did a trial run, if you will, of being completely exit from the business.
yep,
I still
yep,
owned it, but I put a manager in place and set up the processes to do that. And it went okay. I wouldn't say it was stellar. Like, there was no growth over the next 3 years that I was working as a consultant. But working as a consultant, then I was able to travel around the world. I was doing more speaking engagements, and then I found a new passion.
yes,
And that in that fitness business, while it was still a passion, it wasn't the primary passion.
yeah,
And so it was
yeah,
at that point where I was like, okay, I've kind of exited the business. It's not doing really great. I don't think I could sell it right now for what I want. So let me go back into the business. Let me build it up some more and get it prepared to sell. And that was when I went back, and that was like year 8. And then it was another year and a half of prep work to now get the financials in order. Um, you know, as business owners, and I hope this doesn't go out to the IRS or anything like that, but or the revenue services,
yeah, yeah,
we like to put things into expenses that might
yeah.
not really be expenses to the business.
We
So
call
it's
them
clean.
normalizations. There, Tom.
Yeah,
Nice, bland, generic name there that could mean anything really.
that's right. It's ongoing education or continuing ed.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that beach vacation was with a client.
Totally. We talked a lot of business over that mojito.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So shoring up the financials so that when a new prospective owner looked at those financials for the last 3 years, which is usually what they look for, now it shows this great growth, and the expenses are way down and the profit is big. And while I took a hit with taxes for a year and a half, it was well over um, compensated for what the price ultimately that I got for the business.
Yeah, interesting. A business like that, without necessarily going into your exact numbers, but how do they traditionally sell? Like, is it a multiple of profit? Is it a multiple of revenue? What is it? Is it asset values? How did you
Yeah.
come up with the number for with the seller?
So it was really a combo of the net income and the asset value, because a fitness training center um, has a lot of assets to it, and build out, and lots of iron in that business, a lot of heavy things. So there's definitely value in the equipment itself,
Yep.
but then also in the contracts that I had with existing clients. So I made the shift from going just kind of session to session to doing monthlies to doing 18-month contracts with my clients.
Nice.
And a new owner sees 112 plus months of contracts are like golden. Like,
Yep.
there's a lot of value in that. And ultimately, so for me, it was a combo between asset value and that goodwill value or contract value of what
Yeah.
was existing.
For anybody listening here, if I could paraphrase you back here a little bit, Tom, because this is just such a critical point, I think, for every business owner. If you're wanting to build value in your company, you need to think about your model, right? Buyers are buying your future stream of profits, and really what they do is discount that valuation based on all the risks they see. So what Tom's described here with longer term, well, let's call them, they're actually sort of probably more short to medium terms if you look at lots of different business models. But the point being, look out over 12 to 18 months and you've got all this contracted revenue. and no doubt you knew your churn rates at the time too. It's nice, consistent, reliable, reduced risk revenue,
Absolutely.
and that is ultimately worth more to an investor, right? Like that they can discount that back to today's value, apply a interest rate margin and a discount factor, but you're going to be worth a lot more than somebody who is just leaving pretty much hand to mouth.
Yep. Yeah. And if that owner is in the business, that is even more risk because it's that personality. And that's what I found when I exited the first time when I started doing consulting, is my personality was in that business way too much. And that's what drew people in. And when there was a huge shift in personality, the manager that I put into place obviously didn't have my own personality. He had her own, personality, which wasn't jiving with the current clients and prospective clients. And that's why there was no growth to the business. But once I kind of made some changes and processes to really exit me, even though I was there on a regular basis to help grow it back up, I was growing it from a process standpoint, not a personality standpoint.
Yeah, really great point. Do you think too, just to pick up on that a little further, do you think the fact that whoever was the manager, is there, do you think them not being the owner, I always sort of hear this thing of, how do I get my employees to act like owners? Well, the reality is in most cases you can't.
Right.
Because you know what? If at the end of the retired day they go, well, I'm done. I've given my hours here. I'm over this. Yes, those 2 or 3 things would really make a massive difference to this business, but I'll address those tomorrow because it's just not as pressing to me.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you think that played a part in your situation?
Absolutely. Yeah. Nobody's going to pay attention to your business like you will.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be an owner like you are. And there's definitely a difference between the owner mentality and an employee mentality. And we need both. There's not one's better than the other. It's just they're different. And it's good to recognize when you have an employee that acts like an owner or gets incentivized like an owner. And you find that right mix between leader and employee. And then that person is really the golden child of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have favorites, but we do.
Yeah.
You know, a comment I'll add here too, because you're right about employees won't behave like you will in your business, or they certainly won't. They often won't step up to the level that an owner will. The flip side of that, and I've seen this, is where the owner has started to check out.
Yep.
They're just not present. They're not putting in the effort. They're not turning up to as many meetings. They're not invigorated. Well, guess what? Like your employees will also mimic that, right? And so, you ultimately are damaging your culture. You're damaging the way your business performs. Like if you find yourself in that kind of a situation, maybe it's time to think about hiring somebody, or frankly, getting ready for sale, because you clearly shouldn't be in the day to day anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Tom, quick question: when you went to sell, how long did the process take from the moment you said, "Okay, let's do this"? Like, you'd probably been thinking about it and working.
Yep.
Where you said you'd been working on the business for 18 months, getting it ready. But
Yep.
at some point you go, "Okay, I'm going to start down this process of selling." How long did that take from that kind of decision to you found the buyer, the deal's done, settled, paperwork signed, and you've been paid?
Yeah, it was about 3 months
Okay.
from when I just said, okay, I need to sell it, and that was kind of the mentality. I need to sell it by, I think it was May or June was my time frame,
Yep.
because I had other things that I wanted to do,
Yeah, cool.
and that didn't need to be tied to a brick and mortar business anymore.
Yep.
And and I think it was an interesting way, and this is I would always suggest this for any entrepreneur that's looking to sell, is to really look at your network of people that you've had interactions with and use your network to find the buyer.
Yep.
I was really lucky, whenever I would train or find new employees, I always did a training program where, people interested in becoming a personal trainer, I would train them over a 12-week period. I wouldn't charge them for it. I wouldn't pay them either. But they would learn all the skills of becoming a great personal trainer. And then I would have the pick of the litter, right? So I would say, oh yeah, I want to work with that person. And then everybody else can go away and do your own thing.
Yep.
Everybody gets value out of that, right? It was a really great way of finding new employees. And one of the rejects, hate to say that, but he ultimately he wasn't a perfect fit. There was somebody that was better, but I went back to everybody that was in there, and I knew he had his own like little boot camp business going on, and so I approached him. I was like, hey, just curious, have you ever thought about starting your own brick and mortar business? He's like, oh yeah, that's my goal in 3 years. And I was like, how about advancing that goal a little bit? And so, so there was kind of that cat and mouse game at first, because you don't want to tell people that you're selling, because that's going to, diminish, it gets people nervous, gets the employees nervous, gets your current clients nervous.
Yep.
So it was, we signed an NDA to do further investigation, and, I had approached 2 people to buy, and he was like, yeah, this is good. I did owner financing as well. So, which, again, you need to know your risk tolerance if you're going to be doing that. But I was so confident in, one, his ability to maintain the business, and in the way that I had the business set up from the beginning, that there was not going to be a problem with him paying me over a 4-year period.
Yeah.
And so I got a lump sum up front, and then I financed the rest over 4 years, which again is a couple things that are great for the seller in that scenario. One, I didn't get hit with a huge tax bill from selling a business and getting a lump sum. And it gave me 4 years of a nice kind of runway to take off with my new venture as well.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting. Yeah, it just goes to show once again that money's important, but the terms and the conditions and all those things, it's all tied into one discussion. So, really interesting. One little piece of advice I'll add on to your thing, and I agree. Your comment about finding buyers within your network is a good one, because I think people who are associated or connected to your network, who have perhaps a strategic reason to be involved in your business, make good sense. But I'd implore all business owners listening to this too, don't fall into the trap of going, oh, I've got one party here and they sound like they're going to be good and I think they're going to be a great fit, so I'll only talk to them. By the sounds of your situation, Tom, you had an entire list of prospective people that you could be talking to, and some might have been better than others, but at the end of the day, there was a list, there was multiple potential parties, you had options. Because I've just seen too many business owners either have the deal fall over after the fact, or they get lowballed by that one buyer, and they're so over it and tired and sick of it all that they actually end up accepting something they probably shouldn't. And so, just having that little bit of competitive tension, or frankly, in another way to express it, having a couple of options up your sleeve helps you come from a more confident and positive position.
Yeah. And the other aspect that I was thinking of as well is that, this was my baby. I'd grown it for 10 years and I didn't want to give it to a moron either, or sell it to a global, not that, like 24-hour fitness or LA Fitness would have bought it, but I didn't want to sell out, to a big corporation. And because, this was my family, right? All the clients and all that. And I had some emotional attachment to it. And so I wanted to make sure that it was in good hands as well. And the culture would be a good match. And I think a testament to that is they're still going to this day, 5 years after selling, they're still going strong. And while they had, during the sales process, they're like, yeah, we'll probably change the name of the company. They've not changed the name of the company.
Yeah, right. There you go. And look, you know what? I'd advocate for most people too. If the buyer wants to change the name of the company, well, don't let them change the name of the company. Don't get upset about stuff like that. Look, at the end of the day, it's an asset, right? Yeah. It might be your baby. You poured a lot into it. I get it. But if you can detach a little bit from this, yes, you're passionate about it, but it is an asset. And that asset's going to help you move to the next stage of your life. You've probably evolved beyond that business now. So let it go, let it be. Let somebody, whoever the next owner is, do what they need to do with it to make it their baby, right?
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. Tom, we're almost sort of at the top of the hour here, so we're going to probably have to wrap up. And I still want to ask you
Sure.
what your personal sort of definition of success is. But before I do that, maybe you could just give us a bit of an overview of what you're doing these days. Like, what do you spend your time on? Who are the kind of people out there that you serve these days?
Yeah. So I'm in retirement. No, I'm just kidding. I really, I really feel like I am, because now I have a virtual business. So I do a couple things. I do sales consulting and help people with their sales process and getting better at sales, because that's what propelled me in my business. And I also have a call center where we book appointments for fitness centers and holistic medical practitioners in the US and the UK.
Cool.
And then there's some other things that I'm doing as well. But that's my primary business. And that, again, through that process of buying and selling Body3, I've already, thinking what's my exit strategy for the call center, for the marketing that I'm doing, and for sales training, so that it's, just always in the back of my mind. Not that I'm going to sell today. Well, somebody offers me the right number, it might be, but it's you always have that end in mind. And so, that's, I kind of call myself the impact pilot, because I like to have impact through sales, storytelling, and booking more appointments and doing those conversions to help businesses grow.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. A friend of mine says, always reminds me that we all live by selling something. So, and I'm a big believer in that too. It's, by selling something, you're adding value and solving problems, and that's the way to see it. But so if you're listening to this and you're struggling with some of your sales, then certainly reach out to Tom and have a chat to him about how he might be able to help you in your world. And on that point, Tom, I mean, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, my website is probably the best. It's tomjacobs.com, so TOMJACKOBS.com.
Cool.
Also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Not so much Twitter these days. And that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Well, as always, we'll put those links into the show notes for everybody. And as I often say on the show, if you are going to reach out to Tom, perhaps include just a little note, let him know that you heard him on the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast, just to give him a little bit of context. If you're going to reach out and connect on LinkedIn, do that as well. Add a note, be a person, not a robot. Similarly, if you'd like to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, I certainly always accept connection requests from people who are listening to the podcast. But once again, I'd just like a little note saying, heard you on the podcast. That'd be fabulous. I'm always very happy to connect with business owners and people who are trying to do good in the world. So look, Tom, this has been really awesome. To wrap up, do you have what's your view? What's your view on success, and what does that word mean to you personally?
Yeah. It has not changed in the 20 years I've been doing entrepreneurial work. And to me, success is when you're happy. Yep. Happy with the way that your life is going, happy with the impact that you're having to other people, happy with your freedom that you have, however you define that happiness. It's not the size of your bank account, it's the size of your smile.
Yep. Awesome.
And to this day, like, I have achieved, I think, the ultimate of success in my definition of it. I mean, I live in Taiwan. I don't live in the US anymore. It's I get to travel all over the world still. And, I don't have a brick and mortar business that is tying me down. I have a virtual business. I've designed that business in a way that supports me, not me supporting the business.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. And a great note to end on. Tom, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous. I've really enjoyed hearing your story, and I know our audience will get a lot of value out of it, just as I have. So thanks again for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast. If you'd like any more information, please get in touch via buygrowsell.com. hit me up on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with other people. And if there's anything we can do to add value to your world, please let us know. Thanks again for listening.